Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. What a week. Russian nationalists attack towns inside Russia, claiming one day Putin will be overthrown. I mean, it's the stuff of a Tom Clancy fiction novel, but it actually happened. And in Bakhmut, in Ukraine, is Wagner really withdrawing after its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin warns of a revolution in Russia if Putin's army keeps fighting and dying, just as the Ukrainians indicate their counter-offensive has already started. All right, Ilya Ponomarev is a former Russian member of parliament. He was a member of the Duma, and he now lives in exile in Kiev. And Ilya, welcome. You are a member of the Freedom of Russia Legion, is that right?
I am political representative of the Legion.
Political representative. So they have an armed wing and they have a political wing? It sounds like the IRA.
Yes. Not exactly, but there are several resemblances.
Okay. Tell me about this group. I mean, they have just done a raid. Let's start with the news. They've just done a raid across the border into Belgorod, which is inside Russia. What happened there? Because the Russians say they eliminated some 70 fighters. They called them terrorists, and they put down this attack very quickly. What really happened?
No, in reality, obviously, what Kremlin is saying is all fake and it's all false. They were producing some fake evidence. They were distributing pictures and even videos of some blown up vehicles, which are different than the vehicles that the Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps are actually using. And we showcase this because they have different type of camouflage on it. So it's not their equipment at all. But what was actually happening is there was an initial raid into Russian territory in Belgorod region, and which is like northeast for people who want to understand geographically where it is, northeast of Ukraine, so more or less on the way to Moscow. And there was an incursion inside in the first day, 4 villages were liberated, and they went into the district center, Graivoron, which is like the basic municipality, so it's a small town already, not a village. And then it appeared that several of the secondary attacks that were conducted in the different other places of the border were so successful, so that altogether they eventually joined, and that appeared to be a strip of land which lasted more than 40 kilometers in parallel to the Russian-Ukrainian border. So it's a pretty large territory which eventually went under control of our liberating forces. Alas, today it was reported that we suffered certain casualties, but obviously they are not that high as the Russian military reported. 2 people were killed in action, and 10 were wounded. Before today, yesterday there was no casualty.
The Russians say that they chased them back onto the Ukrainian side of the border and that they eliminated them.
That's all crap. It's not true. It's just simply not true. We control the territory. Right now, there is a certain military game going on there because the beloved Kremlin, he sent their ill-famous general, Mr. Lapin, who was commander-in-chief of the Russian military, which were retreating from Kharkiv region. So he was commander of the whole group, which was situated in that sector of Ukraine. So he lost everything there, but it shows that it's a high military rank. So it's a high commander.
This is highly embarrassing for the Russians, isn't it, to have a an attack on their soil, and one
Yeah,
that just
absolutely.
doesn't go on for a day, but goes on for several days.
Yeah, absolutely. So they sent this three-star general, and he was, our guys were actually filming him from ambush, and it was shown how he is commanding just one platoon of soldiers. He would say like, "Go right, go left," So this three-stars general that shows the demise of Russian military in that area.
So where is the Russian military? Where are the border guards? I mean, why weren't they able to stop this attack more quickly? Are they just so overcommitted in Ukraine that they don't have the ability to guard the Russian border?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. So border guards, they were smashed immediately during the very first attack. Police and Rosgvardia, so all these internal siloviki type people, they just fled. They didn't put up a fight at all. There was one military unit which went into fight, but suffered heavy losses and retreated because it was not enough. And they're right now relocating 74th Brigade from Ukraine. Actually, what has happened is a very simple thing. The West was speaking so much that they are against Ukraine to go into Russia, and Zelensky is genuinely against of going into Russia. Ukrainian military command wants to liberate its soil, but they really don't want to go into Russia. So Putin was totally relaxed. So he took away all the protection from the border and relocated them all into Ukraine. Right now, 97% of Russian military is in Ukraine. But we Russians, we never gave an obligation not to fight for our country and to liberate our land. So they were taken totally by surprise. If we would have more force, just physically more people, we could have go all the way to Belgorod and maybe further. We will not be stopped.
Tell me about this group in terms of the Liberty of Russian Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps. There are two separate groups here that are operating independently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's two separate groups. They were even arguing with each other until recently, but finally, a while ago, we made eventually a good and working alliance so that they managed to do a joint operation in Russia, which is a very good news, to the country, to Russian opposition, which is always fighting with each other bitterly. People at the front, the actual fighters, the people who actually do care about the future, they know how to make deals with each other.
How big are these two groups, do you think? How many soldiers are there?
The Legion is 4 battalions and RPC is 1 battalion. We cannot disclose the exact number of people, but everybody who is at least a bit familiar with the military terminology can calculate what is the battalion and do the math.
Battalion size is 300 to 1,500 soldiers, each battalion, if it's a regular size battalion.
No, more or less.
All right. Who is funding this group, and who is allowing them off the leash, if I can use that term? First of all, did the Ukrainian authorities give a nod, give the okay for this group to go and attack Russia?
Look, both of these groups, they are part of Ukrainian military at the end of the day. They are very much autonomous, but they still report to Ukraine's military command because they are part of International Legion as foreign nationals. So they're part of International Legion, and International Legion is part of Ukrainian armed forces.
Then by extension, Russia will say that Ukraine attacked inside Russia.
Well, they can say whatever they want to say, but there was not a single Ukrainian national on the territory of Russia, and not a single Ukrainian national was involved in the preparation of the attack, of the facilitation of the attack whatsoever. So it was all done by Russians, and Russia all the time was using proxy forces in Ukraine, in Donbass. So it's their tactics. Ukraine's involvement is way less than that. But I think that the State Department in the US made the correct statement that the West has never encouraged Ukraine to go to Russia, but at the end of the day, that's Ukraine's business of how to defend itself. And if Ukraine is supporting Russian resistance, I think is the right way to do. Ukrainians will not go into Russia, will never occupy Russia, will never fight with Russians inside Russia. But we, the Russian freedom fighters, we can do this. We are in our own right.
When you say they're supporting, are they supporting financially, and are they giving arms and ammunition and vehicles? And were some of those vehicles American as well?
They do the training, they are giving arms, but they're giving some simple arms. It's not sophisticated machinery, not sophisticated tools. So they are equipping like light infantry in the same way like light infantry is being equipped within the International Legion. The rest we procure during fighting, and there are a lot of trophy vehicles that were taken during fights in Kharkiv region when the Russian military were retreating. So with the Legion and RVC was especially involved there. They took so-called BMPs, the infantry vehicle, basic infantry vehicle of Russian military, BTRs, the base armored vehicle, and several tanks.
Are there American vehicles as well that were used in the attack?
Look, as just like cars, could be American cars,
like Humvees.
Yeah, it could be different, but it's not an assault weapon like the tank, or it's not HIMARS, you know. So it's not something which is like really special. There are a lot of self-made armored vehicles in that group. I know that they were using some Canadian cars to modernize them and to use them as the tool for moving themselves. The tanks, that was important, but the tanks were Russian tanks.
Is there funding by the CIA or by the Americans of this group?
Again, the West is so cautious there. They don't want to do nothing. How many times we were talking to different people in the United States, in Great Britain, in Europe, that, guys, at the end of the day, it's our common problem, the current Russian regime. And it's aggressive. It has nukes. If they would defeat Ukraine, they would go further. NATO openly said that they are adversaries. But so what? Nobody is doing nothing to replace them. And I think that at the end of the day, it has to be done by Ukrainians in alliance with Eastern Europeans, because they have high stakes there. They don't want any containment policy. They don't want any more to be the border countries. They want the empire to be destroyed. They want Russia to be a part of family of civilized nations. They don't want to fight Russia any longer. They don't want to see the threat there. And that's why I think that we are the natural allies. Unfortunately, again, the recognition of this thing is coming pretty slowly.
Tell me what the goal is of these organizations. I mean, this starts with a border skirmish and some attack on villages. How far do you think that this can go, and what is your ultimate goal?
Frankly speaking, I think that in this particular circumstances, again, this success was pretty sudden. Everybody was thinking that it would be just an intelligence through fighting, reconnaissance mission. But it went so well. But still, I don't think that the Legion and RVC, even combined, that they have enough capacity to hold this territory for a long time. I would very much want to, and the guys would very much want to. And the fact that we liberated a piece of our land and we put our flag there, it's great. But I don't think that this time it would stay long enough. But the next opportunity would definitely come. And at the end of the day, we see how the major offensive would go in Ukraine if it would be happening as I expect it to happen, and that what Ukrainian military command expects it to happen. I think that the time when the Russian regime would start to collapse, it's not very much far away. And in this situation, we would need the Legion to actually make a jump to Moscow.
See, Putin is your ultimate target, and you actually believe that his regime will collapse in the wake of what? The counterattack by the Ukrainians, if successful?
Yeah, I think that by the time when Ukrainians would retake Crimea, I think that's his Achilles tendon, and I think that it would not survive this event. We will see, obviously, but the understanding that the war is ultimately lost, finally lost, irrevocably lost. That's the trigger point, because the current elites, they still tend to say, okay, maybe somehow, maybe the West would get tired of all those events. Maybe they would agree to some type of frozen conflict, and in the situation we can return to a certain degree as business as usual. So when there are no hopes, then the only way is to replace this guy. And when they would start doing replacements, they would not be able to hold the situation as is.
Replace this guy, Putin, you're saying? And
Yeah,
you don't believe that this is leading to a frozen conflict? You think that from what you understand, and you have good connections in the military there in Ukraine, that you believe that their fight to retake eastern Ukraine will be highly successful, and they can reclaim some of it, all of it?
I think it's more probable to reclaim Crimea. I think that it's harder to retake Donbass militarily. It's too dense, and a lot of fortifications there. And again, the border is transparent. So for many reasons, I think that Crimea is easier than Donbass, but we will see. Anyway, Crimea is way more symbolically important than Donbass. Russians, they don't care about Donbass. It's like it's Russian propaganda who's saying all this. And that Crimea is a sort of a sacred land, it's a place of military glory, Sebastopol and all this kind of stuff. But Donbass, okay, so we can help them, but they have no symbolic meaning for Russians.
It's one thing to say that you're associated with a group that is, freedom fighting and wants to bring about positive change in Russia. But that some of these members are so-called Russian ultra-nationalists, neo-Nazis. One of them, Denis Nikitin, he's a well-known Russian neo-Nazi. Are you comfortable with supporting this group and who they are?
First of all, RVC is one group, and I'm not affiliated with it. And it's a smaller group. Legion is way larger. Secondly, you remember how Mr. Churchill once was saying when he made an alliance with Stalin, he said that I am ready to partner with devil if it would help me to defeat Hitler. And I think that right now there is no threat coming from these far-right people because they are not large in numbers, but they are good fighters. And they're on the right side of the history at the moment. And then when we retake Russia, we already agreed with them that we need to create a democratic system where citizens would decide whom they want to see in the government and which direction they want to go, and let them vote and let them speak and let things develop the way they want to do it. Anyway, even with those right-wing guys, they have proven since 2014 that they are anti-imperialistic, that they are for self-governing of the people, grassroots, and that they don't want empire to exist any longer. So that's what matters at this very moment. So at this very moment, we are allies, and I think it's counterproductive to dig into each other political biographies. Here and now, what matters.
Last question to you. What can we expect next? And I know I asked it before, but do you think that you'll see attacks in Moscow itself, and that this group is capable of pushing further and launching spectacular attacks inside Russia?
I would very much want to see this year Black Sea from the southern bank of Crimea, and so that by winter time is the right time, by winter time to get to Moscow.
Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
Ilya, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, and always pleasure talking to you.
Lucas Weber is the co-founder of militantwire.com and has analyzed and written on far-right movements inside Russia and elsewhere. And he joins me now from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. Hi, Lucas. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Look, first of all, let's start with the news of the day. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of Wagner, some people say Wagner, is saying that his forces are leaving Bakhmut and turning the area over to the regular Russian army. What do you make of this?
Well, Wagner is best as an assault force. So understandably, with the high attrition rate and the losses amongst Wagner's rank and file, it would make sense for them to be rotated out to refit, rest, and then prepare for whatever they're tasked for next. And the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the consensus is it's coming. So it would make sense for defensive forces to take over the protection of the city, consolidate control, and a couple settlements that would provide a security buffer similar to what they did after they took Lysychansk last year. So I think this is essentially routine for them after they captured the city.
I mean, assault force. These guys, according to the Ukrainians, just ran at Ukrainian positions in such high numbers that eventually they made headway, but they lost some, even according to Prigozhin now, some 20,000 soldiers.
Yeah, well, this is one of the, if not the biggest battle in contemporary history, definitely contemporary European history. First, they had to partially envelop the city, and then they had to take losses in the open to get to the entrances of the city. And then from there, it was a very intense, slow forward grind with house-to-house fighting, which is very costly and bloody. So I don't like to put too much credence behind what Prigozhin says, but perhaps him admitting this makes it somewhat believable, although I'd be skeptical of any numbers put forward by him.
So is there victory there if they kind of take the city and raise a flag, but there are still pockets that are being fought between Russia and Ukraine? The Ukrainians say they did not completely lose the city. I mean, it seems like Prigozhin has a pretty thin victory there.
Well, for his organization, at least, and this ties into him wanting his troops rotated out. Essentially, they want credit for taking the city, which, contrary to many of the narratives in the media, it is strategically important because, as Zelensky says, And this depends on Russian capacity and how much gas they have left on the tank, of course. But it opens the gates to the next major line of defense, which is Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. But I think the Ukrainian counteroffensive is coming before Russia will be able to regroup and try to push forward once again to reach this major line, because Chasiv Yar is going to be a very difficult position for them to take, and they need to really take this to be able to move further into the Donbass, which taking the Donbass is one of Russia's primary tasks. And so in the territorial sense, it is a victory. However, when we look at the high losses, and there was high losses on both sides, usually the assaulting force does take more casualties. It's a highly costly victory, and we will see just kind of what impact this has on Russia's offensive capabilities going forward.
Look, he leaves. He is never a non-controversial figure, but he leaves with this warning, saying in a video, "We are in such a condition that we could fucking lose Russia. That is the main problem. We need to impose martial law." He says this after this attack inside Russia from Russian nationalists from Ukraine. Quote unquote, it goes on. "This divide can end as in 1917 with a revolution." He's talking about that instability that could come to Russia. He says, quote, "First the soldiers will stand up, and after that their loved ones will rise up. There are already tens of thousands of them, relatives of those killed, and there will probably be hundreds of thousands. We cannot avoid that." That doesn't paint a very pretty picture about the war that Russia is fighting in Ukraine and the potential for unrest within Russia. What would you say about that?
I think we should keep in mind that Prigozhin does not have a military background, and he's not a trained officer, and he does benefit from portraying his forces as the most effective fighting force in the Russian military sphere, and kind of subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, putting down regular Russian forces. He's also in a long-standing riff and back and forth with Russian MOD leadership. Although he usually doesn't, or he hasn't explicitly named Putin, and he does. He wants people like Surovikin to be put into higher positions, because he's more in line with Surovikin's kind of thought about the war. But essentially, his group in particular has taken the brunt of the losses because in recent months, because the hotspot has been Bakhmut, and they have spearheaded that campaign and paid dearly for it. So I believe he's looking for more help and more urgency from the Russian military elite and political elite.
I mean, a lot of people don't even understand why these groups exist and why Wagner exists, and then Gazprom has started its own militia. And people don't understand what Putin is trying to do here. But look, let's move on a little bit on the cross-border raids by Russian nationals into Russia's Belgorod region this week. Officially, the Ukrainians, Lucas, say they didn't direct this group, but the fighters say they are armed and assisted by the Ukrainian military. And your analysis that I've read online says clearly their weapons were Ukrainian. So what were these groups, and who was directing them and arming them, do you think?
So the most significant fighting force that we can tell from these videos involved in this cross-border raid or incursion was the Russian Volunteer Corps. And this is a kind of hard right, ideologically oriented militia led by Denis Nikitin, who was involved for some time in the far-right MMA scene and the hooligan scene.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
he
he's
lived in
far right, ultra nationalist, neo-Nazi.
yeah, and he's very open about it in their internal chats. His Telegram channel, White Powder, I believe it's called, something like this, and he owns a far right MMA promotion and clothing brand named White Rex. So they're pretty overt about their ideology. And the other group involved was the Freedom of Russia Legion. Now they're kind of an anti-Kremlin liberationist movement with a not so coherent or at least available ideology, but they are big in the information space. So they're more of a media force than a kinetic force as the Russian Volunteer Corps have been. And this is not the first time RVK has really launched incursions into Russia, because I first started writing about them after they launched an incursion into the Bryansk region in March. And then they followed up with another small-scale incursion, which, unlike the Bryansk raid, there were no clashes. They just kind of talked to some villagers and then crossed back over the border. But on May 22nd, they launched a unprecedented incursion and actually occupied Russian territory, and the fighting lasted for over 24 hours. And why I say that it's they're undoubtedly linked to and under the control of Kiev is because Nikitin said to the Financial Times after the Bryansk raid that he said, "How do you think we were able to cross the border and get these weapons and things?" And we saw them using, they were able to enter this time so quickly in advance because they had armored vehicles and some say a tank provided by the West. And
Ilya Ponomarev, who was on just before you and who I interviewed, is a former member of Russian Parliament who lives in exile in Kiev, and he said, yes, they are getting support by the Ukrainian authorities. Yes, they were armed by the Ukrainian authorities. That they are in fact part of the Ukrainian army. They are part of the Ukrainian army, but they're not taking orders from the Ukrainian army once they cross the border. They are acting independently, but clearly they are supported and organized and let off the leash by Ukrainian authorities.
Yeah, and there were recent reports and leaks recently that said essentially Zelensky wanted to take the gloves off, and he wanted to do exactly what just happened. He wanted to launch large-scale raids into Russia and capture territory. And then also after the drone attack on Engel's air base inside Russia, the head of military intelligence, Budanov, he said that these attacks would continue and escalate further and further into Russia. And we saw this with the drone attack on the Kremlin, for instance, which some were saying was a false flag, but U.S. officials just came out and said it was most likely the Ukrainians, which means it was the Ukrainians. So we can see that.
That's really important you raised that, because I haven't dealt with it earlier in the podcast, but U.S. intelligence officials are saying, yes, it was a Ukrainian attack on the Kremlin. A lot of people thought that was just staged by the Kremlin, but in fact, they are saying that was directed by the Ukrainians. So that's really interesting. But in terms of the vehicles that were used, there are some American, some Humvees, some MRAPs, the big armored vehicle, like the big armored wheeled vehicle. And then Ponomarev even said that they had some Canadian vehicles, by the way.
Interesting. Yeah, and we had our weapons analyst at Militant War Noir. We had him go through the weapons shown in their videos quite a while ago, and he went through and he identified the source countries for each type of weapon, and these were the exact weapons that were provided to Ukraine. And
some of them from NATO countries, from what your analyst has written, right, including like anti-tank weapons, for instance.
Yeah, and then it's essentially Ukrainian officials are just going through the motions to deny this. It's almost a troll, and they are essentially everyone knows, and it's it's out there for everyone to see these weapons and equipment being used. And AP journalist had an interesting tweet today where she said she spoke to many prominent commentators on Ukraine, and none of them would go on record to say that it was the Ukrainians, but they told her off record it was definitely the Ukrainians. So I think they were afraid to hurt the Ukrainian cause, but I think that Kiev's just essentially trolling. I don't think it's a serious effort to deny it.
So, Lucas, how does this fit with the American narrative that in the NATO narrative that they're going to support Ukraine to defend its territory, but not that stops at the Russian border? It obviously doesn't.
No, and I think that something like this probably wouldn't be approved, or at least the preparations seen by American intelligence prior. So it could be them stress testing red lines, because the Russians have continuously put down red lines, and once they've been crossed, maybe you'll get a intense strategic air campaign that lasts a few days, but eventually they just let it go. And a lot of Russian ultranationalists, and you can see it in the military blogging channels, they think that Putin is being soft in not responding more harshly to these attacks. So that's something to look at as well. And these are the sentiments that Prigozhin is trying to tap into as well, because many of these channels that I've been observing, they have much more respect for Prigozhin than Putin. So this is something that to keep an eye on in the future, because maybe the unrest that Prigozhin was speaking about could happen. We'll have to wait and see.
All right, so these two groups are promising more attacks on Russia, and that maybe they might even go to Moscow. They held a news conference when they got back. They invited journalists. They're clearly after a spotlight, which may serve them in what regard, and how seriously should we be taking these guys?
Well, actually, prior to the attack, just a day or two prior, they released a message, and they said, we have lots of partisans inside Russia waiting for us. And then the video showed a group of them who were apparently inside Russia with guns. And if we think back to the Bryansk raid, he told the Financial Times that Nikitin told the Financial Times that they actually linked up with domestic Russian partisans for their incursion at that point. And they have now again threatened further attacks. So they've shown that they follow through on their words. So I would expect more of this activity in the future. And I think it is important to take them seriously. And I also think there is a risk of kind of elevating and normalizing this particular group, given their hardcore ideology, because we have to think about what the negative security implications could be once the war ends. And for instance, one far-right ultra hooligan channel posted a picture of Nikitin and called him a hero of the white race. So they're really gaining a large following online and amongst hooligan and far-right groups across Europe and even North America.
Isn't there a danger that this feeds into Putin's narrative about denazification, and that, the second part of Putin's narrative is that Russia is not the aggressor, Russia is defending itself. So now you have attacks on Russia, and you have attacks by this group and ultra-nationalist, white supremacists, some of them, not all of them. That seems to feed kind of it certainly serves Putin domestically, doesn't it?
Yes, but I think at this point it's so the political environment internationally, or at least throughout the West, is so polarized that it's essentially going to be waved off as nothing and kind of swept under the rug. And it is ironic too, because as I've written before, Putin did say denazification was a goal, yet they have far-right neo-Nazi militias such as Rusich and WPRS and various
inside Russia. They have their own neo-Nazis.
Yeah, and they're fighting on the front line too. Even the Russian Imperial movement has the Imperial Legion, which is deployed in Zaporozhye right now. And one of their members gave an interview and talking about how his leg was blown off during an operation near Vuhledar.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much, Lucas. I mean, it's hard to take these guys incredibly seriously originally, but they have been able to penetrate inside Russia, and they are armed and they are willing to fight. And it just seems like we're just about to hear a lot more about them as they carry on and promise to carry on more operations.
Yes, and all signs point to both Kiev and Moscow sticking to their maximalist aims. So there looks like there will be no peace agreement in the near future. And if the longer this war drags on, perhaps far-right groups on each side will be relied upon for recruitment, maybe even foreign fighters, or inciting attacks abroad, cross-border incursions, things like this. So these are things that we may be able to forecast.
Lucas Weber, the co-founder of MilitantWire.com. Lucas, great to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you too.
And that's our backstory on the war in Ukraine, and some of it spilling over into Russia now. In the next few weeks and the summer months, the Ukrainian counteroffensive will unwind. And how it goes will tell us a lot about the future. I'm Dana Lewis. Thanks for listening to Backstory, and I'll talk to you again soon.